So let me get this straight. In the past several days, you've had a government freeze because Pierre Poilievre has taken documents to the RCMP, effectively just kind of shutting down government temporarily. And then while all of that happens, you have Justin Trudeau, who's not really anywhere to be found. You have Jagmeet Singh, who's very much nowhere to be found. You have a British Columbia provincial election that's about to happen in the next week or so. And then you also have Liberal MPs that are saying, good job, terrorist sympathizers that are in the streets of Canada calling for the death of Canadians. We stand with your freedom of expression and freedom of speech. Am I kind of understanding all of that correctly? And then when the leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, goes and says, hey, they're calling for the chance of death of Jews and death of Canadians in our streets, he gets kicked out of Parliament. I think that's it. No, wait, there's more. Then there's the prorogation of actual government shutdown at a more, a longer time span where they really can't do anything. House of Commons, Parliament, committee hearings, everything would be completely frozen, potentially until the new year. I think now that just kind of encapsulates the past several days. Plus, there's also like the worst storm that's about to hit the Florida coast, causing devastation 1 week after the last hurricane has hit. Yep, sounds like we're in a massive shit show. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another video, everybody. Before we get into it, I do want to encourage y'all to smash the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It does really help grow the channel. We're going to be taking an overlook at everything, along with some new information, some things that some MPs have said. And also, I made this post last night on X where I said, Joli, she directly tied Nazis to Pierre Poilievre, and it's since blown up a little bit. And we're going to be taking a look at exactly why I said that, because that's kind of my interpretation of what she did say. But nonetheless, let's get into this video here. We're going to take a look at a few highlight clips of the John Rustad, David Eby, and the completely irrelevant Green Party British Columbia provincial debate that took place last night.
I can tell you something, as the Conservative Party of British Columbia, we are laser focused on the people of this province. 1 in 3 people are thinking about leaving this province. 1 in 2 youth can't see a future by staying in British Columbia. This, to me, is what needs to change. As a government, a Conservative Party will make sure that we're laser focused on people, on making sure that we meet their needs. There are many issues that people raise, but I tell you, when I go across this province, whether it's in Vancouver Island, or whether it's the Lower Mainland, or whether it's the North or the Okanagan, it's the same issue. People are struggling to put food on the table. That's why we come forward with cutting the carbon tax. That'll save $1,200 per family in a year. That's why we've put forward the Rustad rebate to reduce the burden of whether you're renting or paying a mortgage.
Okay, that's like a massive difference between the Conservatives and the Liberals. So cutting the carbon tax would save a lot of money, right? $1,200 maybe on average, but that means that you wouldn't be paying into the carbon tax. So if you were to get $1,200 in rebates from the carbon tax, it would cost you $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, just an arbitrary number. It'd be significantly more than what you're getting back from the rebates. So why not just get rid of all of it and not think that the taxes can solve the weather, because there hasn't been a good plan in place that would prove otherwise. So that's where John Rustad kind of sits on there. I do have another clip pulled up.
There was a lady. She was in labor. She went into the hospital, and she miscarried in the washroom and sat there with covered in blood, waiting for hours for services in an emergency room. That is David Eby's healthcare in BC.
Yep. Can confirm, even when it comes to non-emergency, when it comes to family doctors, even myself and my family, we don't have a family doctor, and it's just atrocious what's going on here in British Columbia. I'm just gonna play one last clip because I really just want to highlight how important it is to get out and vote for those that are in BC. Take it from somebody who's never voted. I have immense guilt of never voting, and I am going to be so excited when I actually fill out my first ever ballot.
When you look at this crisis of overdoses and drug addictions in British Columbia, it is horrendous what is happening here. Last year, just over 5,700 people died in Canada. Close to half of those were in British Columbia, 2,500 people in British Columbia alone. Clearly what that means is the policies in this province are not working. If you look at any other province by any other measure, they are performing better than we are in British Columbia. So we need to take a different approach. We need to make sure that we bring an end to decriminalization and safe supply. We need to bring an end to this, to the government being a drug dealer, quite frankly. What we need to do in British Columbia is build up recovery. And yes, you're right, there is significant investment that's needed, and we're going to make those investments. Everything from doctor-prescribed treatment to short-term recovery to longer-term recovery and to involuntary, compassionate recovery. These are things that need to be done. We're going to build out this capacity. But I'll tell you the story of Christian, who was a 13-year-old, and when he was first addicted and not told by his parents did everything they possibly could to try to get help for him. He eventually passed away when he was 28. And when I talked to the mom said, I asked the government to try to help me and they refused. They didn't even answer the phone.
That is the current state of British Columbia. And I think we've all noticed a significantly larger amount of drug addictions and just mental health problems in Canada, but just hyper focusing on BC. And it's an absolute shit show. And, you know, the people to blame, the person to blame is 100% David Eby. He has destroyed, the NDP has destroyed this province. We are sitting on just such a resourceful amount of just resources in this province, and we don't use anything. It goes to a waste. And BC, if I'm not mistaken, is like the most woke province out of all the provinces. And that's not a reflection of the people. That's unfortunately a reflection of the party that runs this province. Like, we're a test pilot for SOGI and all these, like, you know, all these things, everything that gets rolled out across the country, if I'm not mistaken, starts here in BC. And it's just absolutely disgusting. The people are fed up, and I think we are very, very excited to go vote. Now let's switch over to federal things. So yesterday, I made this post. Breaking, Milan Joli just admitted that it's okay under free speech to go and call for the death of Canadians in the streets. I can't believe this. Now, why did I say that? Well, because a couple of days ago, this took place in the streets of Vancouver, David Eby's Vancouver.
Israel, burn, burn!
Israel, burn, burn! Fanning the flames. Politicians across the country accusing speakers at a downtown pro-Palestinian rally of crossing the line.
I find this sort of violence completely unacceptable. This sort of hate should have no place in British Columbia.
David Eby also condemning the actions, in a statement saying this kind of rhetoric is wrong and has no place in our province. The rally was organized in part by a group known as Samidoun, which claims to be a grassroots movement advocating for Palestinian freedom.
Death to Canada! Death to the United States! And death to Israel!
Critics, including the federal Conservatives, saying the Liberal government must take action.
Samidoun has been fomenting these violent and horrific protests and mob actions. This organization is a front for an already banned terrorist group.
Samidoun has already been banned in Germany. Soldiers raiding operations there last fall, directly tying the group to Hamas. In Canada, in addition to condemning the behavior, the Liberal government claims the group has already been flagged with national security advisors for an emergency review.
We know this issue isn't political, and it's a shame that Conservatives only stand up when they think it suits their political advantage.
The Vancouver Police Department now investigating to see if actions of protesters were criminal. No one from Samidoun responded to requests for information.
I mean, they did call for the death of Canadians, the death of Americans, and the death of Jews. And in response, this is what Foreign Affairs Minister Milan Joli said.
I personally and this government is against any form of anti-Semitism. And we know that there's been a rise of anti-Semitism across this country. It has worsened since October 7th. We've heard from the Jewish community from coast to coast to coast how much this was a problem. And we need to continue to fight every day, working with mayors across the country, working with premiers, and of course.
Okay, so what does that mean? We need to fight the anti-Semitism. In the same breath of air, just like 20, 30 seconds later in that speech, here's what Milan Joli said about the Samidoun protesters that we just saw in Vancouver that were torching Canadian flags, calling for the death of Canadians, Americans, and Jews.
Is we as a government believe also in the Charter, in the fact that freedoms need to be protected, not only freedom to speech, but also freedom from intimidation, violence, discrimination. Now,
so she is protecting the free speech of Samidoun. This is literally protecting the free speech of those protesters because it's a breach of their Charter of Rights and Freedoms to call for the death of Canadians, Jews, and Americans. And so for anyone that's looking for clarification of Milan Joli did not admit that they're allowed to say that, yup, she in fact did. Now, politicians don't come out directly and say these things, so you have to piece it together. And she is quite literally protecting people's ability to do that. Now, that doesn't work the other way. You're not allowed, and I don't encourage, and I'm not saying, well, it's not fair because I don't get to do that. No, I got none of that speech in my vocabulary to call for the death of other people. Hell no. I don't care who you are. I'm not doing that unless you're like, a pedo or something like that. Then yeah, all right, sure. Yeah, we can get rid of them. But nonetheless, that's just insane. And I want to pass the question off to you guys. How do you feel about that? The federal government took such a strong stance on, freedom of expressions, your Charter of Rights during the blip and then during the honk, and they just beat the crap out of people. You can't wave Canadian flags. Anytime you go to a carbon tax protest and axe the tax protest, it's turned into a police state, and you've got dozens of armed police officers with tactical gear ready for you to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, and they agitate you. Just their presence by intimidation. But you can call for the death of Canadians if you're waving a Canadian, or not a Canadian flag. If you can call for the death of Canadians if you're waving a Palestinian flag, which again, there's ties of that Samidoun group directly to Hamas. So again, I just want to, before we move on, I want to pass the question off to you one last time. What the hell is going on with this country? Like, this just makes me feel like I'm going a little bit insane that these people have the audacity to try and gaslight me as if I don't know what the frick is going on here. No, I'm sorry, Milan Joli, but that's not okay. You guys have intervened on much smaller things, but you don't want to because you want those votes, don't you? And then in case you missed it, what happened in the House, Conservative MPs really, like just unanimously, everyone that spoke pretty much had something to say about the liberal ties to pretty much Hamas sympathizing groups.
Yesterday, on October 7th, while burning the Maple Leaf, Samidoun terrorist sympathizers openly called for death to Canada, death to the United States, and death to Israel. After 9 years of this Prime Minister, sadly calls for death to Canada and our allies have now been normalized. Samidoun operates as an arm of a listed terrorist organization in Canada. Will the Prime Minister protect Jewish Canadians from homegrown extremism and list Samidoun as a terrorist organization?
The Honourable Minister for Foreign Affairs.
If there's one thing today we will be able to agree is that we both condemn what happened yesterday on the streets of Vancouver talking about. And that's why we will always condemn any form of anti-Semitism. And I'm convinced that everybody in this House will condemn any form of anti-Semitism. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The way she talks and her movement, it just reminds me, it makes me feel like she's LARPing, right? Like live action role playing, like she's pretending to act in a way that she really cares. And when somebody's over dramatic for the way they're acting, it doesn't match what's actually happening. Just the way that she's very expressive, it does not match at all. She is not fit to be a politician. I'll tell you that for free. Speaking of politicians, there were a couple that were met outside of Parliament yesterday after House of Canada, after House of Commons, after question period, and here's what they had to say when they were stopped.
Polyev not being able to speak today. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm amazed that someone who throws such a cheap and vicious slur gets a day in the doghouse and then comes back and then throws vicious slurs the next day. This man wants to be Prime Minister of the country. He's expected to set a standard, and he just refuses all the time.
Well, we saw two speakers' rulings today. We saw the Pierre Poilievre one, but we also saw the Yvonne Baker one. Do you think it's fair, the treatment of both of them? One wasn't allowed to speak for like 6 months, the other is just for one day. Do you think that's a fair thing?
No, absolutely. The situation in the House is very confusing and difficult because we do see two sets of standards. What happened with Mr. Baker, I think, is completely unacceptable. This is a passionate MP who's speaking up on Ukraine. And yet he's been silenced in the House, whereas we see really low-grade, vicious commentary continuing from the Conservative benches. And I think the Speaker seems intimidated by them, and he certainly seems intimidated by Mr. Poilievre.
Do you think this is setting a dangerous precedent? Because it seems that they're using this ruling with Poilievre as a way to bring Baker back without having him need to apologize or retract. Do you think this will now just allow people to say whatever they want and just they get a day off and come back, or how do you see this being?
Well, I'm concerned that when a would-be Prime Minister makes such a vicious slur and refuses to retract, sets a really dangerous precedent.
Right. I don't know what he's still doing. I know that he quit. Maybe that's for re-election, but nonetheless, keep in mind that guy right there that we just saw, Charlie, right? He tried last year to put a motion forward, pass a bill that would make it criminal, not just illegal, but criminal, to say anything positive about oil and gas. So these people are extremely tippity-top radical. And then you have Jewish Liberal MP Anthony Housefather, who was fed up to reached a boiling point with all the anti-Semitism that was happening in Canada, but also in Parliament, or I guess the lack of action that I guess, is if you're not doing anything against all the crap that's happening, then are you kind of complicit in it? And that was Anthony Housefather's perspective. And so he threw in the towel, or was just about ready to, when Justin Trudeau said, no, hold on. Don't leave just yet. I'll make a new division for you. You'll be the Liberal MP on anti-Semitism. So not that that's exactly his role, but it might as well be. He's in a new defined role as a federal MP to combat anti-Semitism. You can't make this up. And you could just see that his soul left his body when he was being questioned by a reporter.
Ongoing dispute between the Foreign Affairs Minister and Mr. Poilievre. Is Melanie Joli pandering to...
I'm not going to comment about... You can ask me a substantive question. I'm not going to talk about personalities. Anti-Semitism in this country is a serious issue. The demonstrations have had anti-Semitic rhetoric that has been floated out, and to use October the 7th, a day where 1,200 Israelis were murdered, the worst day for Jews since the Holocaust, to do what was done in a number of places yesterday, and to make anti-Semitic in statements and glorifying terrorism and glorifying what happened on October 7th is an absolutely horrendous thing that should not happen in Canada. And anyone who was part of those demonstrations, what happened at McGill where a building was vandalized, it's absolutely disgraceful. So whatever differences there are between the parties, I think and I hope we all agree that October 7th is a day that has to be remembered for what happened and not used by people who don't like Israel to terrorize people in Canada. Yeah. Look, I would have liked it to be done a year ago. But I don't believe that politicians can control when the national security agencies report back and what they say. But again, I think it needs to be done expeditiously. I know the minister, I've talked to him, if not hundreds of times, more than 50 times about this issue, and I'm very confident he sees it the way that I do. Good day. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, I think that Anthony is going to be revisiting his position in the Liberal cabinet, because you can't possibly watch Canadian politics and not see how disgusting and how incompetent the Liberal government truly is. And now we're switching things over to Chrystia Freeland, and she actually comments on the potential of prorogation within Canadian politics, which would essentially just shut everything down until maybe even the new year. Let's take a look here.
It's the Liberals' key policy focus.
One of the most pressing issues for Canada, for Canadians, is housing.
Chrystia Freeland announcing new mortgage rules to encourage building secondary suites and consultations to bring in a vacant land tax. But the most pressing issue for the government right now is just surviving.
We have been having constructive and very concrete conversations with both the Bloc and the NDP. I'd be ready to have conversations with the Conservatives.
The Liberals need one of those parties to stay in power, and despite Freeland's overtures, don't expect it to come from Pierre Poilievre.
They have to do exactly the opposite of everything they've done to fix all the problems that they've caused.
The NDP House leader doesn't know what negotiations Freeland was talking about.
Everybody seems to want to talk to the NDP, but the reality is no, there are no negotiations, period.
The New Democrats have said they want a price cap on groceries and help for renters, but haven't provided precise details, unlike the Bloc, who've given an October 29th deadline to increase old age security payments by 10% for seniors 65 to 74.
What I heard is that we're still negotiating.
Which will be needed, as the Liberals have signaled they won't support the OAS proposal, but are willing to give more to seniors. One other option rumored to be considered, proroguing Parliament, essentially shutting down the House of Commons to avoid any confidence votes, something Freeland rejected.
So I keep hearing these rumors, so I want to put it to you. Is your government considering proroguing Parliament?
No.
That leaves working with the opposition parties as the only way forward for the Liberals.
So there you have it. Proroguing Parliament is a hard no. And it's very, very rare where you see Chrystia Freeland actually say something without hesitation. Is she telling the truth, though? Or is she lying? Because after that press conference happened, you had mainstream media outlets did different variations of, their panels and stuff like that. And that's what we're going to take a look at next, because other experts seem to think that it's still an option that's on the table. And, I kind of have to ask myself, right, just because she said no, does that mean that it's true? Like, there's been so many instances where they say one thing and do another, and maybe the lack of hesitation is to throw people off. And now is she doing it in a way that she knows people are going to get thrown off? So it's reverse psychology. I don't know. At this point, it's kind of getting a little conspiratorial. But nonetheless, let's take a look at what the mainstream media, what they have to say about it.
Listen, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is kind of back from a bit of a road trip. Is that the advice to give the precarious situation right now, to sort of get away from Parliament as things kind of cool off?
Well, it's not so much that he wants to get away from Parliament, although I'm certain he enjoys not being in Parliament right now, because it is a bit of a car fire. But he's got all these international summits, right? So he's going to Laos for ASEAN. He's going on to Germany for a sort of a military meeting. He's going on later to the Commonwealth. So he's packed for the next couple of weeks. The relevance of that is this: the minority parliament is hanging by a thread. Right now, most people don't know. They mercifully don't have to know that business has ground to a halt because they're having what they call a privilege debate, which means no government business, 6 days they've been filibustering and arguing. I won't even bore you with what it's all about. Just know that not much is happening, right? Obviously, the NDP have withdrawn their formal support for the government. The PM is away. So people are asking questions like, with the PM away and the chaos in the House, when will the government have a cabinet shuffle? Because people are expecting one. How are they going to rejuice their agenda? What's going on? And people are increasingly looking at all this dysfunction and saying prorogation, which means basically you cut the House of Commons out of the picture. You try to come back later. So let's just watch these next couple of weeks unfold. If I was going to make a prediction, and only fools make prediction, ding, 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 fool here, I would say that we're going to get to the beginning of November, that the government's going to watch the U.S. presidential election on the 5th of November. It's going to maybe do a bit of a cabinet shuffle, bring in a fall economic statement, and then prorogue the House. And then it gets interesting because it's like, does the PM stay? Does he go? Does he use a prorogation to unleash a leadership race? Does he stay and does he rejuice his agenda by maybe backing off the carbon tax? Like, what will happen? But watch this space. Right now, the one thing we know for sure is that Parliament is not functioning well.
It is not.
Wow.
No. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting situation there. Turning to Ontario now. The province kicked up a little more.
It's very much not functioning well. And I mean, I'll be honest, the only way that the Liberals are going to get any sort of heat off of them right now is if they do this prorogation technique. But you still have the Bloc Québécois in the cards that have not received yet what they want. And they did say that sometime this week, could be today, could be tomorrow, that they would be, if they haven't gotten what they wanted, early morning, right, later on today or tomorrow, that they will, in fact, instill a motion of vote of non-confidence, which is one of the very few things that can actually get put forward in a time right now where we're in a freeze out or a sort of intermediate lockdown. It's not as severe as what could happen, the prorogation, right? That would just mean lock the doors, turn the lights off, and leave and come back, you know, in 30, 40, 50, 60 days, might be after the new year, right? For all we know. But what they can do right now is the Bloc can, you know, throw in that Hail Mary. Again, we don't know how that's going to turn out. We don't really understand fully where the NDP lies. The NDP, you have members that have gone and protested with these pro-Palestine protesters in the past, but maybe it's gone too radical and too out of hand that they want to distance themselves. We don't know. They are an extremely radical and kind of unpredictable party in these instances, but we're just going to have to wait and see how this plays out. And as we approach the end of the video, I'd love to know what you guys think down below in the comments. What is the most likely outcome? Do you think prorogation? Do you think a vote on confidence triggering an election? Or do you think nothing is going to happen and we're just going to resume the House and go about our days as if there is nothing really to worry about? Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. And on your way out, if you haven't yet already, I'd like to encourage you guys to smash the like button and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.